Welcome to The Money Show. Tonight's ShapeShifter is Tom Winterboer. Who's Tom Winterboer? He's the curator of African Bank. Who's African Bank? Well, yeah, you might well ask the question. They've had quite a low profile over the last, is it 3 years? When did you start the job at African Bank?
About 20 months ago, Bruce.
So nearly 2 years ago, when one day we got the message that Leon Kikinis, the founding chief executive officer, was no longer in the building. I mean, that's how long it's been, nearly 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, it was a bit of a build-up before that, but then August 2014, and, it's pretty much happened all over a weekend. So, it's been interesting times.
What is a curator? First question on my list of questions from listeners.
The big thing with a curator is that in terms of the Banks Act, a curator has quite extensive powers, and but ultimately the main aim is for a curator to look after creditors, to look after the employees, and look after the banking and financial services industry as a whole, looking for stability and the like, and that really sort of directs you where you go.
A curator is somebody who's appointed by the regulator at the Reserve Bank, so kind of appointed by the state.
Yeah, in fact, the letter of appointment is from the Minister of Finance. Yeah, you really replace, take responsibility for the bank as a board would and almost as a CEO would. So it's quite a lot of responsibility around that.
But actually bigger than a CEO's job then. You actually fulfill the role as an individual of what a board should have been doing and the CEO should have been doing.
Absolutely. And you take, the decisions on the ones that they would have taken. So you've got to consult quite widely, make sure you stay on the high ground and the like, but very challenging.
Yeah. Now, your background, you've worked for PwC, all your career?
I actually spent a year just after I qualified with one of the merchant banks, investment banks, with Senbank in those days. And then
where did that end up?
Then that ended up as part of the AppCap part of the ABSA Barclays Group.
Okay.
And so I spent a year there, but I quite enjoyed the variety of the professional services firms, and then moved off to London for 2 years and returned. And I've had just a very interesting career, lots of variety over many years.
I mean, you were head of the financial services business at PwC. What leads to you then saying, I'm willing to put my hand up and take on a very challenging job of taking a bank from the brink of collapse and resurrecting it?
Yeah. So I must say I wasn't really a willing taker there. The John Marcus, the governor at the time, I must say she phoned me about 10 days before it happened. We had a meeting, and in fact, after that left the building, and then she said, could I come back? Which I then did, and she said, Tom, could you take it on? I must say I suspected it could come along, and we were sort of happy enough in the firm and PwC, but I did say to her, Jill, don't you want to use someone else? But that didn't get too far.
No, okay. So nobody says no to Jill Marcus, by the way. I've had personal experience of trying to say no to Jill Marcus. But the job then is you take over the running of a bank. An African bank was in deep trouble. They'd been extending loans were going bad, collections were struggling, and they tried to reprice loans, make microloans cheaper, and the business had fallen on very, very hard times.
Yeah, the problem is that they had huge sort of loans, high volumes in about 2012, and those loans started getting bad, and then also the funders, and I heard your sort of chat to Chris Stewart earlier this evening. The funders got quite unhappy, and they got to the point where they couldn't be repaid. You had Ellereens Furnitures, that was a significant drain on the business. So you've got to really make an assessment as to where it stands, and I must say in that first week of curatorship, when we got to the Thursday, we're down to R1 million of operational cash, so that was a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, again, it got that bad.
Yeah, no, it wasn't in a great shape, and clearly we couldn't meet the funding commitments, and it was the right thing. Now, what happens is clearly in consultation with the Reserve Bank, and I suppose a bit of a push, a board needs to ask to go into curatorship, which they then duly did. So it's just a lot of long hours understanding what is out there. The first day was absolutely crazy, and it felt like 6 days in one meeting with the executive committee at the time, various times, to see where we go. But the big thing was to make sure that people continue repaying the debts. Yeah.
Now, because African Bank, you I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to come back to that point in just a moment. But when you move into a business like that as a curator, You've now got to figure out which way is up. And it's like if you were on the Poseidon, there was that great film, The Poseidon Adventure, the original film. I wasn't wild about the second one, where the ship turns over in the ocean and you don't know which side is up. You don't know where to go. You don't know where the leaks are. You don't know whether or not if you go down this passage, you're going to be faced with a flood of water and drown. There's a lot to do and a lot to find out really, really quickly.
Yeah, the big thing, and I think it goes for anything in life, it's never just a personal effort. So, you get a team involved. I've got some of the guys involved that were involved in the, Lehman's Allied Irish Bank in the UK. So, I've got that in place. And then really you've got to analyse it bit for bit in terms of what is there.
But the sand is running through the hourglass. The money is running out. By the Thursday, there's R1 million worth of operational cash left. It's going to be gone on Friday. Well, that's pressure.
The big thing is the Friday was a big repayment day, but it could have gone any way. So you sit there pretty nervously, and you've got to, I tell you, I was in that treasury room. I don't know, I think must have been 10 times. Just making sure that we actually got to the point where you can start repaying your operational expenses. But the danger also then once again is that you got staff. We started off with about 5,200 permanent staff, which we thought were too many, and you've got to find that balance. How many people would you let go, and if you do that, wouldn't everybody go? So a few nervous moments there in terms of just stabilizing it, but then I must say, in terms of team effort, the Reserve Bank bank supervision of the guys were very helpful. FSB, Treasury. I also involved Louis von Ziener. I think in life it's quite important to, not to just see what you're seeing, but also understand, what is there that you should expect to see. And I've asked Louis to get involved. So it's always a team effort.
Louis is becoming chairman of the new African Bank. Louis von Ziener, the deputy chief executive of ABSA in the day, and he was part of ABSA at the time of Unifor. Unifor was a micro-lending business that challenged ABSA very significantly 15 years ago. But I look at the curatorship of African Bank, and I've got to wonder whether or not this is the first time in South African history that a bank is emerging from curatorship. Usually, banks go into curatorship and nothing ever comes out. So they simply look to mitigate the risk to the financial system. As long as you contain that, nothing else matters. This is actually there's a business coming out of this.
Yeah, I must say years ago, in fact, African Bank had gone into curatorship before, but probably about 20 years ago, I'd say.
Before Leon Kokenis got involved.
And then Leon Kokenis got involved, was recapitalized and the like. But, the way that this was done was to really take the good business out and then put it into, obviously into the good bankers. We talked about it. But you go through lots of debates in the time running up to it where you say, well, okay, what is the best way? And then once again, people like the bank consortium that got involved, BIC, said, well, they couldn't accept that you stay in the current bank with all the possibilities of litigation, as one has seen in places like, Lehman's, and then later on with JP Morgan, where they bought books.
Unpack that for me a little bit, because you sit here now with a banking business. It's got lots of debts. Many of those debts are bad and either won't ever be repaid or they may be repaid at some point. On the other side, African Bank didn't have a retail banking operation. It owed a lot of money through the bond market to institutions. People who might have managed my pension money may have lent money to African Bank as collateral, as to lend out to their customers. So you've got debt on one side, you've got people who owe you money, and in the middle, there's a problem. How then do you decide what's the good and the bad bank? How did you split that?
Yeah, we started in that week beforehand, and that was just a high level exercise. I must also say that we looked at the provisioning of African Bank and probably the 4 weeks before the curatorship was announced. So we had some understanding of the book as to what was there. And I must also say that we started off by saying, well, why doesn't one just take the bad assets out, like what's been done across the world? So it's a tough thing, but you say, well, how much capital would you need? And I think, once again, with the involvement of the consortium and others, I think we landed at a good place, because you debate as to, well, which assets come across, how much can you afford to give the creditors, how much certainty you give them. And I must say, I was of the view, 90 cents in the rand, I thought we just may not be able to make that. Maybe we should have communicated 80, but yeah.
Okay, now explain to me who gets what, because when a bank like this goes into curatorship, the shareholders lose everything, right?
Absolutely, yeah. High level, so what did the group look like? You had a Bill, investment company at the top, then the subsidiaries was Ellerines Holdings, which went into business rescue, Stangen, the insurer, and then the bank. So the bank wholly owned by a Bill. So unfortunately, in terms of a Bill, the preference shareholders in a Bill may get something as a result of other assets in the group, such as Stangen. It wouldn't appear, and I guess that's really for the business rescue practitioners to say, as of the ordinary shareholders may get something. But certainly in the bank itself, you've got to start, and there's a bit of a waterfall as to who gets what. And you may know that we've, the Reserve Bank actually, will also be putting some funding in, and that goes in via the residual bank. So there's about 3.3 billion coming in. So they would be a super senior creditor, so they would first get their 3.3 billion. There's an indemnity fund of about 3 billion. Once again, put in by the SARB, so you need to accumulate that. And then beyond that, the senior creditors and the subs.
This is all very technical stuff. But the Reserve Bank, the taxpayer, because I've contributed money to this as a taxpayer to bail out African banks, I get my money back as a taxpayer.
Yeah, and I think high level they'd be putting some capital in, the 5 billion capital, and then the other two amounts I mentioned.
But people like Chris Stewart at Investec Asset Management, who went to Parliament and shouted at you, do those financial institutions who've got my pension money, do they get some money back? Do they get the 90 cents in the rand that they lent to African Bank?
Two levels. I think Chris, unfortunately, was on the subordinated side. So they, you would get about 37 cents in the rand in the good bank. Of that, you would get about, and that comes to about 1.7 billion. He gets 10% of that in cash, the rest in instruments. But the senior debt, and call it roughly 40 billion, those guys would get 90%.
Now, this is like you telling me how to make shortbread, okay? You understand this stuff. This is deeply complicated stuff. And I think what it illustrates, though, is that the huge levels of complexity of rescuing a bank. Have we managed to get to a point, and nobody's seen the reports that John Myburgh did, the guy who did the report into Rico Treasury Bank, that went off to the National Treasury. Is there any sense that there was criminal wrongdoing within African Bank? Or was it simply a business that just went bad quite quick, slowly first and then very quickly?
Yeah. In terms of John Myburgh's report, he's done his report. It's gone to the Reserve Bank, and I know that they are keen to publish that, bring it out. In terms of the timing, unsure of that. I think in the main, it was really just a bit, I don't know, perhaps not reading the market right. But those 2012 loans, I mean, they went up to about 2.5 billion rands worth of loans a month. I think it was just too high. The risk levels were too high.
A number coming through and saying, hold on a second, where's the money that was in fixed deposits with African Bank that was used to help bail it out? What's going on there?
Right. I think the money that came in mostly through asset managers like Stanlib, Investec and others. So, if someone put 100 in, 90 of that would go to New Bank, and off that 90, 10 would be paid out in cash but directly to the asset manager. The other 80 in debt instruments.
But what happens if somebody had 10,000 rand in a high interest bearing account at African Bank? Where is that money?
Okay, so there was only about 100 million in those accounts, and those accounts were kept hold. They didn't lose anything. It's only when you went via an asset manager that you lost money. The rest of the money is guaranteed by the SARB, and they will get that back on request if they want it.
Okay, so if you've had money tied up in African Bank at an interest rate that you were promised when you put the money in, 10%, 12% or whatever it was, you will get it with interest.
You will get it with
Martin and Ray want to know.
Yes, no, you would get it with interest. The investment is directly with African Bank, and I'm sure they could via a call center, request for their money to be repaid. But a lot of people actually make the mistake by having gone through an asset manager who then goes into African Bank, which obviously is a problem, and that gets us to the 90%.
What happens now? There's the good bank, which is being relaunched as African Bank Limited. It's going to be more Capitec-ized in terms of taking deposits and lending money out. That's all well and good. The bad bank. How much money is sort of tied up there?
Yeah.
How much debt is in there?
Yeah, so in terms of the debt, I mean, the number of amounts written off, and in fact in excess of about 30 billion. You get to a point where you can't collect on on those debts anymore. The net book value of that at the moment is about 5 billion. Apart from that, there's a float. So one would obviously continue collecting on that book. We may sell some parts of the book to try and maximize those recoveries. We'd expect, if things continue as they are, to at least be able to repay the Reserve Bank's money. So for taxpayers, they'd get their 3.3 billion back plus their indemnity fund, and probably a small amount for the senior creditors and which will be left there.
Now, I see Simon Mantell has given us a call. Simon Mantell is a baker in Cape Town. He has been very outspoken on the issue of microlending. Please pop your headphones on, Tom Winterboer. Those headphones, make sure the volume is right, because there's writing in capital letters on my screen. Simon Mantell, you want to have a word with Tom Winterboer this evening?
Yeah, hi, Bruce. I don't know whether I got it right that investors are going to be getting money back.
Not shareholders, I don't think. Tom Winterboer, just clarify this.
Yeah, unfortunately, if you're a shareholder in A Bill itself, Simon, you wouldn't easily get your money back.
But the asset managers, I understand they're going to be getting money back. Well, the thing, Tom, is that African Bank robbed the poor. I'm an employer of blue-collar workers, and the effective interest rate they were paying was 93%. So people who've lost their pensions should be taking on their asset managers that they could have even invested in something that was an absolute disgrace. There's no other way of describing what African Bank did to the poor of this country.
Simon Mantell, thank you very much for your call this evening. Simon Mantell, a very impassioned critic of microlenders and the iniquitous rates charged and the life policies that were sold alongside. Does he have a fair point?
Yeah, it is concerning. In terms of the rates, 93%. I mean, that is not what African Bank did. I think
those weren't the interest rates, but those were the effective rates in terms of when you had to take out their life policies and all of that sort of stuff. Over a term, you were paying back considerably more than the 30% annual interest rates that they were charging.
I wouldn't think it's that high, and there's certain...
Call it 50. I don't know, but I mean, 50 maybe is something more palatable. It's high.
It is high, but you're servicing a community that that need money, and you've got to look at the risk profile. Now, if African Bank didn't lend to the people in terms of what they have, they wouldn't be in the position where they are. So I think the risk profile should have been lower. I think the interest rates, would have been adjusted accordingly, and we've now seen the DTI lowering the rates, to a lower point.
In your opinion, was African Bank, those 2012 loans, was it careless? Was it reckless?
I wouldn't say it was necessarily reckless, but, in terms of the levels, I think it was just too high. I think the risk appetite for the bank was probably too high at the time, and they didn't realize the impact of the bad debts that would come through at that stage.
Leon Kennis was always a proponent of microloans doing good. I believe he truly believed that. But did it lose the plot?
Microloans, I think just the people that need it and the effect that it plays, I think it's quite important. But if they lose the plot, well, clearly they wouldn't be in the problem where they ended up in August 2014 if everything was done in the way it could and should have been.
What does a curator do once the curatorship is over?
A curator continues with the bit that's left, the residual debt services, making sure it gets collected, but that probably involves a week, a month of involvement. The Good Bank has got a service level agreement. They'll collect on behalf of the residual debt, and just making sure that we get as much in for firstly recover the Reserve Bank's money, and then secondly the creditors as far as we can.
Is this a nice retirement job?
Not necessarily. I think it'll probably keep me quite busy, I think.
Tom Winterboer, we must leave it there. Tom Winterboer, the curator of African Bank.